Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Break free from the forces holding you back. Get the life you deserve. Eliminate stress, reduce anxiety, decrease depression, and start living your full potential. Thousands have used Dr. Foojan Zeine's awareness integration theory, an evidence-based behavioral health breakthrough with incredible life-changing results. Getting rid of past trauma, having fulfilling relationships, increasing earnings, and living their best life. Now, the Foojan app is available to everyone. The app is Dr. Foojan Zeine's awareness integration theory in the palm of your hand. Download the Foojan app today.
Do you wish to wake up one day and hit the Life Reset button? Life Reset, the awareness integration path to create the life you want by Dr. Foojan Zeine, helps you navigate crucial life areas, heal the past traumas, and cultivate fulfilling relationships and careers. Life Reset is your guide to a profound journey to reshape your life. Grab your copy on Amazon or Audible now and embark on a path to a more joyous and fulfilled life. Welcome to The Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Foojan Zeine, a psychotherapist, author, and the creator of the Awareness Integration Theory. I'm thrilled to have you join us today for what I promise you to be an insightful discussion. In this episode, I am so excited and honored to chat with Dr. Claudia Black. She's a renowned addiction author, speaker, and trainer, internationally recognized for her pioneering and contemporary work with family systems and addictive disorders. Claudia designs and presents training, workshop, and seminars to professional audiences in the field of family services, mental health, addiction, and correctional services, as well as speaking in public forums about addiction and recovery. Since the 1970s, Claudia's work has encompassed the impact of addiction on young and adult children. She was the first to name and coin dysfunctional family rules: don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. She broke the barrier and openly discussed physical and sexual abuse in the context of addictive families. And she utilized art therapy in the context of group work with young children that have offered a model of children's program for the past 3+ decades. She described the phenomena of delayed stress emotional trauma and child's denial process, the phenomena of looking good kids, as they relate to growing up with addiction, and hence the meaning of and phraseology of adult children of addiction. Claudia Black is the clinical architect of the Claudia Black Center for Young Adults. She's a senior fellow in addiction and trauma program specialist at the Meadows Treatment Center in Arizona. And she's one of the original founders and serves on the advisory board for the National Association of Children of Addiction and the advisory council of the Iluna Foundation. And it's a development of Camp Mariposa, a camp for children impacted by addiction, actually. Her workshops have been presented to an extraordinary wide array of audiences, including military, academics, prison systems, medical schools, and extensive mental health and addiction programs. Dr. Claudia Black has extensive multicultural experiences working with agencies and audiences in Mexico, Japan, Brazil, Australia, Scotland, Iceland, Germany, England, and Canada. Many of her books and videos have been translated and published abroad. She's the recipient of numerous national awards. Some of them I'm just going to mention: the National Council on Alcohol and Drug Addiction Educator of the Year, the NAADAC Lifetime Achievement Award, and the American Society of Addiction Medicine Media Award. She has authored more than 17 books. And today we're actually going to talk about her latest book that just came out, Undaunted Hope: Stories of Healing from Trauma, Depression, and Addictions. And we've spoke about the book and the concept of the traumas that are big trauma, what we call big trauma, the ones that are what we call them small trauma, how they affect and how they shift into and produce and symptomology of possibly depression, many of the addictions, eating disorders, many of personal conversations and the things that we talked about from what we've seen in a client, what we've seen in ourselves, what we've seen as a professional, and how it could all help in bringing you closer to have an understanding of the dynamic that shows up internally and possibly the ways to heal it. Her library of books, audios, and videos are available through Central Recovery Press, and you can find her at claudiablack.com, claudiablack.com. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm positive you will also. Now, be sure to subscribe to this podcast, my YouTube channel, and connect with me through my website, foojanzeine.com, any of my social media platforms. Share your thoughts with me. I'd love to hear from you. Without any further ado, here's Dr. Claudia Black.
Intentional Parenting, a practical guide to awareness integration theory, written by Dr. Jafari, Dr. Foojan Zeine, and Dr. Manoukian, three experts in human development, is your step-by-step guide to raising a healthy child prepared for a culturally integrated world. You're supported in parenting infants to adolescents using the latest evidence-based scientific research on parenting. Order your copy on Amazon now.
Eliminate stress, reduce anxiety, and decrease depression. Dr. Foojan Zeine's awareness integration theory has helped thousands like you get incredible life-changing results. The Foojan app gives you her evidence-based treatment in the palm of your hand. Download today.
I am so glad and honored to have Dr. Claudia Black with us. Welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I'm excited to be able to talk about everything that we address in our work.
I am your biggest fan. You probably don't know this. I've followed you. I've listened to everything at every workshop you have ever given that I've been there. I've come in. I've read every one of your book. I referenced you in all of my books. I've referenced you in, I was just doing a workshop for therapists in the model I created, and I put in actually a lot of references from this book in there. And I, put in, this is from latest Claudia Black's book. And I love, love, love your book, The Undaunted Hope. And this is the stories of healing from trauma, depression, and addiction. Well, not only that I've been kind of with you from afar and watched you grow in every angle of your work, and I've learned from you. But on this book, the design of the book, it's so beautiful because not only it shares the stories, but it also shares the professionals who come in with such a love and respect and share their view of what's going on. And it's such an overall encompassing book. So first of all, thank you from all of us, not only from us who are in the mental health field, but everyone who's out there who can read this and really connect in some level to some of the stories. So please share how this whole idea came about.
Well, first, let me say, I love knowing that what you felt as you read the book was just that it was a lot of love and a lot of respect, because I was writing a book that was so serious, and every one of my books has been serious. But as I share various stories in the book, the stories are complex. The stories are hard. I mean, people, are really struggling with some serious issues in their life. And I was concerned with the book being too painful for people. And yet at the same time, what I was really talking about was recovery and the potential for recovery from these very serious heart issues. And so the way the book came about, one, it's sort of interesting because from the standpoint, this is not how the book came about, but, I began my work and became very well known for my work back in the 70s and the 80s around children of addiction and adult children of addiction. And back then, as you worked with people affected by addiction in the family, what we were working with was certainly addiction in the family, but we were working with the trauma that takes place in the family. And one of the consequences certainly has to do with depression and anxiety. And so my whole career, I've actually been addressing the very issues that Undaunted Hope talks about. I have been consulting at the Meadows, which is a major treatment program in Arizona. And for many years, it was one treatment program. Today, they have multiple facilities, which if they're residential, most of them are still in Arizona. But then now we have many outpatient facilities and some virtual programs, et cetera. and a couple residential, not in Arizona. And they actually came to me and said, Claudia, would you be willing to write a book about some aspect of who we are? Because I had such history since 1998. And I'm very hands-on in my work there. And today I actually oversee all of the young adult work that occurs there. It's at the Claudia Black Young Adult Center, in fact. And so I really had carte blanche. I could write the book in any way I wanted to do that. So I thought, let me write about what it is that we treat, which are, as I said, very much issues that pertain to a lot of my early work, in fact. And so what we treat is a lot of various addictions, a lot of co-occurring dynamics, meaning that you have a mental health issue along with addictions. Sometimes the mental health issues are the primary issues, such as depression. But so much of what underlies whatever people's mental health issues are and their addiction issues are is trauma. So when I did the book, trauma is going to be an underlying theme throughout it all. And I've always told stories. And when I do my speaking, I share stories of people I've worked with. And I share it through their words and their voice. So when you're speaking, it's almost as if you go into a role play. But in writing, I really wanted to give voice to people whose lives, as I said, have been complex, certainly have been painful, who are struggling with these issues, but have found a path to recovery. And what I want people to know is, for example, one person's depression doesn't look like another person's depression, that the way they manifest themselves can be very different. I did also want people to know that there wasn't one answer for whatever the problem is. It's not like there's a specific pill you can take or some one group that you will go to and you will find all your answers there. There's probably multiple ways in which to come about finding this recovery process. I also wanted people to know it didn't matter how far you've gone in this progression of what it is you're struggling with, that people can recover. And so I actually have used the stories of 21 people. I interviewed in depth 30 people. I think it was 32 people, in fact. And I used 21 of those stories to convey the messages. So I do have a chapter on eating disorders. I have a chapter on depression. I have a chapter on substance use disorders. I have a chapter on intimacy disorders. And of the 10 or 12 people whose stories I didn't use, they had beautiful stories. My process with them was very lovely, but I was trying to look for some diversity, and there were times where the stories were similar enough in the process. But as I said, I wanted people to know that if you're struggling with an eating disorder, it could look very different than this person's eating disorder. And so I used stories and this wonderful interview process. And then we use a lot of what we call senior fellows at the Meadows, people who consult in similar capacities to me. Some are more hands-on with clients, some are more in terms of training our staff. And I asked them to do some very pointed commentary on various stories. So, such as I'd go to Peter Levine and I'd share with him 3 stories and say, Peter, would you speak to the such and such issue that got brought up in her story? And he would send me back, a page or 2 about it. And I'd go to Dick Schwartz and say the same thing. I'd send him maybe 3 different stories, or maybe they'd be even similar to Peter's stories, but I'd ask him to address something different. And so that's where we get commentary from different people. And I also use some of the clinical staff at the Meadows with that commentary. And then you obviously get a lot of me in the book. I was saying before we actually began the podcast, in some ways it was quite the project as much as it was writing. And what I had to be really sensitive to, as I said, was is serious. And I wanted people to feel hope, and obviously the title of the book. And they have every reason in which to be hopeful. What I also want people to know is you don't have to get to the depth of crisis that my storytellers got to get help. You don't have to end up in an inpatient treatment program to get help. That there are many ways in this process, many times in this process, that you can reach out and ask. And that can be in individual psychotherapy, that can be in psychotherapy groups out in your community, it could be in self-help groups, it could be in intensive workshops. again, it's not that everybody has to have inpatient, though in some people's cases, that is what's indicated.
Yes, I've actually referred a lot of people to Meadows and really great experiences with people who I have referred for eating disorders and addiction to opioids and alcohol. One of the great things about also this book is that you define what trauma is. I think sometimes when we use trauma, the word trauma, people only think that it has to be very acute, very, facing death-oriented concepts. But there's a definition about trauma that, yes, those can be. You could be in the war, or you could, have accidents and, natural disasters. But there's also so much more, that it's not only a life and death issue, but it's really a damage to your ego, to your psyche, to who you are, to your emotion, to your boundaries and all. So you've talked about the big traumas, and you've talked about the little traumas. And I think a lot of times, not only we might have faced, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect from childhood, but there's so many other angles into trauma that it might show itself in the comorbid of, the depression, the addiction, the sex addictions, intimacy addictions, and all sorts of different types of self-mutilation, self-harm. So if you could share a little bit about what trauma is, so that when they can recognize it, because sometimes people go through, their life, and they're not realizing that the source of what's happening to them right now could be the trauma. Can you share a little bit about your work with trauma?
I will. One of the things, by the way, that I have in the book that people seem to have appreciated is I have a glossary in the back of the book. And I thought for just a second is I would just share just So I have a very simple definition here, but trauma is a disordered mental or behavioral state that results from emotional stress or injury that exceeds the body's brain and the body and the brain's ability in which to cope. The reality is that a part of the human condition is somewhere in our life we're going to experience traumatic stress, for which many people are able, in essence, to work around that stress in a way that it doesn't have lifelong consequences for them. But there are also many other people who have the kind of traumatic stress in their life that they're not going to have the resiliency in which to be able to work through, the impact that that's having on both their body and their brain. And as Foojan was talking about, we know about the blatant kinds of traumas. We know about how traumatic it can be when you're caught up in a natural disaster, or there's a car accident, or your house burns down, or there's a sexual assault, etc. But what people fail to understand is that a lot of traumas are what are often called little t traumas, that they are chronic, they are subtle, they are ongoing. And particularly when they occur at the time in your life when you're developing beliefs about yourself and beliefs about the world at large, these experiences create trauma within our body. Examples of what I'm talking about is to be raised in an environment as a child in which there are unrealistic expectations. And what happens is you come to learn shame-based beliefs such as that no matter what I do, it's never good enough. And because you're a child, in time you come to believe that who I am is not good enough. So again, to be raised on a chronic basis, and again, what makes it traumatic is because it's occurring at the time in your life when you're developing beliefs about yourself. To be raised with those unrealistic expectations, to be raised with harsh criticism, to be bullied, to be demeaned, again, on a chronic kind of basis. When you're raised in a family system in which there's a lot of rigidity and it's not okay to make a mistake, when people are very controlling. It could be being subject to an acrimonious divorce that goes on not just maybe for a few months, but for several months, and maybe even for a handful of years. It could have to do with unpredictability. It could have to do with the pain of broken promises. And for many people, it's going to be a combination of all of those kinds of things. And what happens is when the trauma is not so blatant, the way we live our life just becomes a way of life. And we normalize it, and we don't see it as particularly hurtful to us. And because so much of trauma is trauma that's occurred in our childhood years, people get really confused about, well, am I blaming my parents? Because I really don't want to be blaming my parents. After all, I'm 45 years of age today. Going back and looking at the trauma that has influenced our belief systems that is creating a lot of our problems today isn't about blaming parents. It's about undoing a denial system. It's about recognizing the loss and the pain in your life and grieving that loss and that pain. But even more importantly, it's about identifying what you internalized about yourself and how that's playing itself out in your life today. How did those belief systems that you internalized from whatever that combination of trauma was, how is that a role in what it is that you're doing in relationships today that are so painful to yourself? What does that have to do with the depression that you feel today, the anxiety that you feel today? What does that have to do with that need and that ongoing desire to medicate, be it through the use of food, through the use of substances, to maybe escape, through the use of gaming, through the use of gambling? So the whole point in looking at trauma, wherever it's been in your life, has a lot to do with what did you make up about yourself about that? And connecting that to how is that connected to how it is you're living your life today in terms of usually self-defeating behaviors, self-destructive kinds of behaviors. So that's the purpose in addressing that trauma. We often, when we come from a place of trauma, we in essence often repeat those traumatic experiences, sometimes in a very similar form, sometimes in not so similar a form, but operating from that same belief system again, that I'm defective, there's something wrong with me, you can't trust other people, it's not okay to make a mistake, it's not okay to ask for help. Those are the kinds of belief systems that we get into trouble with today, that fuel the disorders we have, but also fuel our ability to even ask for help.
Very much. And I think part of the lack of desire to ask for help is knowing that at times you have to go and face those pains and let them go. I remember having this experience with this little girl who we were at a party and she was walking and a little piece of glass went into her toes and she was crying and her mommy was holding her. And I looked at her toes, and I asked the host to give me a tweezer so I can take the glass out of her toe. So the little girl was sitting there, and every time I would have to do this and kind of squeeze a little bit just to get the head of the glass out so I can poke it out, she would yell and say, "Leave it alone. I don't want you to touch it. It hurts too much." And I said, "Well, you can't walk." "I can walk." So she started walking and compensating because she wasn't, she was going to use her toes to go up and use her other parts of their legs and to be able to walk. And it dawned on me also, like, this is what we do with our mental wounds. It is so painful to look at them again and allow them to be out and heal sometimes, that we create these coping mechanisms around it for a lifetime. And some of them obviously turn into addiction. And every time we want to go and face it, we're like, no, I'll figure it out. I'll figure out and how to cope with it, but don't touch it. Mm-hmm. And that's why, when we look at people coming to get help, sometimes they're looking at getting help as another source of, can you just easily, quickly relieve this so I don't have to face it? And sometimes with therapy, we do have to go in and take care of it. And even in your book, you said, it's not just talk therapy, it's also with body. And sometimes when we work with our bodies, we have to feel it and contain it and express it in order for us to become healed from it. Can you talk about the process of healing through a trauma so that people who are listening or viewing us, they get that, yes, there's a healing, and the healing truly has a process into it. And it's one of those things where it might feel like they're in the dark tunnel. And sometimes, as a therapist, we're watching the light, we're watching their growth while they're going through and healing inside until they actually come out of the other side and look at, be in the light, actually.
I want people to know that there is emotional pain. Obviously, there is emotional pain. Addressing that which has been so hurtful. Our fears are usually far greater than the reality of what will happen should we acknowledge our truths. But we use a lot of different modalities to address this trauma, and the therapist, any trauma therapist, their goal is to provide a sense of safety for you, not just physical safety, but psychological safety. And their intent is also to pace you in a way that they're going to want to pace you in a way that you don't become overwhelmed. And we use a variety of different techniques. It might be journaling. It could be other writing exercises other than journaling. It could be expressive arts. It's going to, we have certain modalities such as what's called EMDR that will allow you to actually visualize the scene, identify the belief, and at the same time, not feel the emotional catharsis. We have body-oriented therapies. We can use dance. We can use movement. We'll use a lot of breath work. My point being that whatever maybe you've seen on television in terms of drama shows isn't necessarily what's going to take place at all in the therapy process. Our goal is to pace you so that it's safe, that you do not feel overwhelmed, and it doesn't always require this big emotional catharsis. You're not necessarily you're going to have to get enraged about what's happening in your life, nor are you necessarily going to, fall apart in tears. And people have great fears about that if I really get in touch with the depth of my pain, that somehow I'm going to curl up on the floor in a fetal position and never be able to get up. That's not what's going to happen. That may be what you feel like internally. That is not what is going to happen here. The therapy process will, as I say, guide you in a way that you still have some level of, you're still controlling the pace as well as they guide you in this process. Nor are we going to allow you to get to a place that you're so angry that you lose control over that kind of that anger. That a lot of the therapy isn't just speaking to what the trauma is, as much as it is, as I said earlier, it's also finding out what those cognitions are and reframing those cognitions and reaffirming that part of self that really has been lost, reaffirming your own strengths, really tapping into what those strengths are, those things that brought you a resiliency in spite of what it is that's taken place in your life and where it is you've gone in your life. Everybody who walks through, I'm sure, Foojan's door and my door, you all exude strengths. You all have demonstrated some resiliency. Just the fact you're showing up is demonstrating some kind of resiliency here. And so in this process, as we address that which your vulnerabilities, we're also going to be building those strengths. We're also going to be giving you coping mechanisms, tools, and skills so that you can regulate those emotions so you don't feel out of control with them.
Yes, and as I was thinking about many times the meaning, as you said, what we make it to be about who we are and who the world is. It kind of goes into the fabric of how we behave and then create results in different areas of our life. It shows up with us at work. It shows up with us with our family. It shows up with us with our mate. It shows up with us in how we are with our body or the society or everything we do, because we made up something about ourselves, which through that lens, now we live that storyline into all of these different kind of roles that we play, areas of our life that are. And I've also noticed that, as we explore each of these areas, then you could see the impact of the trauma and what we made the trauma to be for us, how it impacts our life. And we could see that in a family, right? Like if there was a family trauma and there were a couple of siblings, you could see what each one of these siblings at the time made it mean a particular thing about them and how that manifested in different areas of their life. And you could kind of trace back all of these things to, a family wound that was happening. But it's fascinating how each one of us creates our own narrative out of what is, and how important it is for us to be aware of that narrative that we created and how to heal it.
Let me give you an example of exactly what you were talking about in terms of people within the same families and can create very different narratives. In that you could have one sibling, let's say you have a father who's alcoholic and very unrealistic demands, and you have one daughter who is always trying to meet the demands of that dad and is pushing and shoving and doing her best to excel so that she will get approval from him, and so that he'll be happy and he won't be off raging at the family, etc. So it's also about stabilizing the family. It's about her getting approval. And in this process, she can feel okay about herself. So she becomes highly perfectionistic and she excels at everything she can, but she gives up sort of all that little girl stuff. She becomes an adult at a very young age. And then you have another sibling. It could be male or female, but you have another sibling and they have the same kind of experience with dad, but their attitude is, doesn't matter what I do, will not make a difference anyway. Why even bother to try? So you have one going through life trying to prove herself, and probably having some level of success, maybe in certain work areas or in terms of performance, but doesn't know how to be with other people on an equal basis, is very controlling of other people, is very unrealistic with other people itself. And so that's going to show in, if not her workplace, it's going to show in her personal life. With partners, it's going to show with how she parents her kids. And then you've got the other kid who just, why bother to try? They don't know how to initiate. They always need to be with people that are going to take the lead. They're very passive in their parenting. They're very passive in their relationships, raised in the same environment. Totally different lifestyles.
Yes.
One goes off, let's say the perfectionistic, controlling, performance-driven person. Actually, what I see a lot of, this is really sad and it gets reflected in the book. I have a story in the book, it's called The White Picket Fence, of a young girl who, again, unrealistic expectations, white picket fence family, literally, and she's going to commit suicide because no matter what she does, it is never good enough. And she realizes that. And while she has all these trophies, in essence, all around her, it doesn't matter. It's never going to be good enough. So somebody with major depression is going to commit suicide, where maybe the other sibling in the family who is just, who, as I said, doesn't know how to initiate and why even bother, their answer is through alcohol and drugs. And so the same family gets manifested very differently.
Very much, yeah.
I do want to say something about how much, when it comes to depression, how much people who are depressed can be closeted depressed. And what I mean by that is we don't show the world. You get a false sense of who I am. I look good. I function in terms of taking care of the house. I function in terms of work. I might excel. I may not excel, but I certainly don't look like somebody who self-loathes. A lot of depression is about self-loathing. It's about self-hate. And that self-hate comes from that belief that I'm inadequate. There's nothing I can ever do that's going to make a difference for me. I feel hopeless to be able to affect anything in my life.
Yes, very much. Dr. Black, why in your practice in so many years, what do you see the contribution to the ratio of depression and addiction keep rising, although we have so many treatment modalities and we have, so many of the psychotropic medications, and we're becoming much more, with media and print media and books, there's so many more conversations about education, about mental health, and yet we're keep still seeing addiction rising, depression, statistics rising. What are your thoughts about that?
I have two thoughts about it. Two particular thoughts about it. One is particularly in our younger people today, I think technology and smartphones are playing a significant role in the depression and the anxiety that people are experiencing. And I think that I always say, I no longer have to be raised in an alcoholic family. And I use those examples a lot because that's where the basis of my work was. I no longer have to be raised in an alcoholic to feel like who I am is not good enough. Just give me 2 hours a day on social media. Now learn who I am is not good enough. I'm not adequate. I'm not sexy enough. I'm not cute enough. I'm not smart enough, etc. But also, it isn't just social media. I think you heard me use the word smartphone as well. And that is that the amount of time we spend, be it in gaming, be it in YouTube's, though there's great value in some of that. But if we're spending copious amounts of time with that, the more disengaged we are from the real world. And, I always used to talk about children of alcoholics, the hero kinds of kids who become the other parent in the home, and how they're not out playing with their friends and just being kids. Well, that's what's happening in today's world. Kids are not out playing. And it's on the playground where you learn how to be with other people. It's on the playground where, on an equal basis. It's on the playground where you learn how to negotiate, learn how to problem solve. You have the opportunity for bonding in fun. And when we're in front of the smartphone all the time, that's not happening. And so that really speaks to what's happening, I think, with our younger generation of people. I think that the other thing that has happened that affects all of us, whatever age we are, be we in our 50s, 60s, or 70s, is what we've experienced in the last, 30 years. And that is a lack of connection in terms of community. That I think it has a lot to do with, we no longer are connected within our own neighborhoods oftentimes. I look out at, I lived next to these people for 7 years, and all I know is I know what he does for a living, and I know that they have 3 kids, and I know maybe where their kids go to school, but I can't tell you anything else about them. And I've lived here, let's say, 7 years. That's an example, one of my experiences, by the way. So you go to move and you don't even say goodbye to your neighbors because you never knew your neighbors. Families live across the United States from each other. Now, one of the wonderful parts about technology is we can connect. Grandparents can connect with grandkids in a way that they haven't been able to when they live thousands of miles apart or hundreds of miles apart. But still, we're not connecting. I was just talking with a family the other day that I live on an island in the Pacific Northwest and fairly close to Seattle. But the family has their kids and grandkids in Seattle. But because they're not really in Seattle living with their kids, or their kids aren't living on the island, they don't have time just to drop in. They don't have time to just, pick up one of the kids and take them someplace. That is now we all go over and we have dinner together and we spend 2 hours, and then or they come to my house and we have dinner together. We're not in community. And I think that is really significant.
Absolutely. What you said about the into technology was very interesting. I just saw this app yesterday, which it changes not only your whole face, but it changes your body size. So you put your picture into the app, and the app takes your picture and kind of makes you just utterly beautiful based on the standards of the app, and changes your body. And I was looking at this app and I'm like, it's really enticing to see yourself in that mode. However, if you really present yourself as that to the world, you'll have to be hiding for the rest of your life and just pretend that this, whatever you made up as a facade, is going to deal with the world. And then you're always going to feel the lack underneath, and that's not who I am, and have to hide for the rest of your life and not be able to connect literally in reality with anyone. And it's interesting of how many of these apps are popping up, because obviously there's a need for a person to look another way versus who they are, and pretend that that's who they are, and then act upon out there, put under the different name and live vicariously through, another pseudo person. But in the meantime, they're getting more and more isolated and raising the conversation of I'm never good enough. I will never be good enough because of the creation of the facade that's out there.
And there's that. And if you knew me for who I really was, you would not like me. And, it used to be that we'd have to be raised in these highly traumatic families with mental illnesses and addictions for that to manifest itself. But today, that's manifesting itself totally as a result of technology, that I cannot show you who I am because you will not like who I am. So I'm going to create this false image. And pretty soon I buy into this false image. So I have a disconnect from myself as well as a disconnect from, these relationships that I'm supposedly having. Just that idea that, I just had somebody who just passed away, and everybody who commented in the regarding in the obituary where they could make comments, almost probably 3/4 of them were Facebook friends, had never met the person, felt strongly about the person, but again, not a real relationship. And what I want to, one of the things I thought was most interesting in doing this book, and I'm going to bring it back to this book, was all of the methodologies that we use to treat various addictions, depressions, traumas. They're wonderful. They're really important. But the most significant thing that came up throughout this entire book was community. Absolutely, number one, the thing that made the difference for them is that when they actually had an opportunity to heal in the context of, in this case, it was inpatient, so they had a lot of group work, but they could meet other people who also were addressing their issues. In some cases, they were very similar issues. In other cases, they were not, but they were still very serious and they had a lot of pain associated. As they met other people who sometimes were just a day or two ahead of them in their recovery process, and they would be sort of enveloped in this process of, we're not alone. We're doing this together here. I can support you when you don't feel the strength within yourself. I always say that these are disorders of isolation, and recovery is about connection. And other people are part of this process to shine the light when oftentimes we can't find it for ourselves. And then to connect in a part of this process where we know viscerally that I am truly not alone in this world. The need for belonging is a basic part of our human need that we're missing out on. And so however people get help for these issues, again, inpatient, outpatient, I do want to say that you will find great benefit in finding community with others who are also in a recovery process. Now, that might be a self-help group. It could be a therapy group. And it oftentimes begins by just reading about people who've had similar issues, and just to know that you're not alone.
So important what you were sharing about the sense of belonging, because most people, if they're not having that sense within their own family system, or they don't have it, for example, if they go to a school, or they are a minority in a particular community, and they're not feeling it from the rest of the community. Like if they're going to school, they get shunned away. If they're at work, they get shunned away. So they don't have a sense of belonging at all. And it was beautiful in what you said, that sometimes the belonging shows up in the community of healing. And if there are people who have a sense of belonging in similar woundings, but also in the journey of healing, and knowing that not only that they're in the most vulnerable space with each other, but they also sense each other's strength and know that their strengths are being seen. So not only their vulnerabilities are being seen, but their power and strengths and resiliency are being seen. And sometimes for the first time in their life, they're actually feeling, I am being seen, and I'm okay, and I'm being liked, and I'm being loved with who I am, and being seen as who I am. And I think that's the utmost level of healing for people.
I always say that it's a major shame reduction. From a therapy standpoint, we talk about shame reduction techniques. Honestly, the best shame reduction techniques is to be with other people who are also in this recovery process. And while maybe I'm recovering from an eating disorder and you're recovering from anxiety, but what we have in common is our shame-based thinking, that who I am is not okay, that there's something wrong with me. And again, all those negative beliefs that we have. And just knowing, it's not like I want other people to struggle like me, but I know I'm not alone and that you understand. I mean, that's part, somebody understands. And again, it can manifest very differently, the problems. But what you do understand is the thinking that got me to where I am.
Yes.
And the acceptance. I mean, you said that really well. The acceptance I get from other people. They're not seeing me as a four-horned animal. They see me as somebody who's just been vulnerable.
Yes. Everyone, Undaunted Hope, stories of healing from trauma, depression, and addiction. Anything we haven't shared that you really, really want people to know?
I'll probably just want to reiterate some of what I have shared. One, I do really want to reiterate how much community can actually sometimes override various modalities and techniques. I want people to understand that there's a lot of different ways that we can help you work with, be it your anxieties, your depressions, your intimacy disorders, etc. That there are many people who've walked this path in front of you and are willing to lead the way. I do want people to know that I wrote Undaunted Hope for the layperson, and I've always tended to write my books, majority of them, for the layperson, with the hope that the mental health professional, the addiction professional, will benefit from it. I'm sort of this belief, if you write sometimes to that professional person, then we leave out the person who's struggling. And I think this is very empowering. I think that the books can offer some education to help you understand what's happened in your life, and then also offer a direction in terms of where you can go with that. And so I want you to feel empowered in this process, and I hope that Undaunted Hope provides that for you.
That's exactly how I, as I was reading it, I felt, which is not only, I've been a therapist for more than 32 years, but I've also been someone who's gone traumatized as a child, sexual abuse. I've migrated alone, at age 12. So there've been traumas after traumas, divorce of the parents, neglect, and many things. And it was interesting as I was going through the book, it was on both levels. Not only I experienced this connection and a sense of belonging with many of the stories that I heard from different angles of it, but also as I was reading the comments from professionals, even coming from the angle of a client, I was experiencing like, ooh, I'm being seen and talked about, but talked about from such an amazing love and respect that made me understand, wow, all right, yeah, that's what's going on with me. Well, thank you, like, for understanding and giving me this bigger picture of what's going on with me, which I feel it, but I can't really name it, and I don't know what it is. And thank you for making me understand what it is. And then the tone and the way, the loving tone is almost like, again, like we said, I'm being seen and I'm experiencing this. And then from the hat of a psychotherapist, as I was reading the comments and all of it, still, like you said, there's always something that I was learning about. Oh, look at that angle. Like when I was looking at how you said, or how Peter Levine, which I'm also a big fan of how Peter Levine is looking at things, is like, wow, look at the angle that's coming from. And it's always something that, inspires me. So absolutely, this book is for anyone who has suffered in a sense in life in one way or another from some sort of a trauma, for the families who, we all, even if I'm all jolly and hasn't happened, but I'm sure that if in my own community there are people who are like that, and it makes me have an understanding of them. And yes, if you are in any format a mental health professional, you learn so much from this book. So thank you for allowing us to have this in so many different layers. Dr. Black, how could people find you?
Claudia at claudiablack.com. I have a website, and also, speaking of that website, I actually just did the Audible for this book, so it won't be out for probably probably maybe August in 2024. But in doing the Audible, I decided to do discussion questions. And so I have 10 discussion questions for you to reflect on yourself in terms of different parts of the book. And that's going to be available on my website, which is why I brought that up, claudia@claudiablack.com. I think that's an email, isn't it? So it's just the website, claudiablack.com. Yeah. And I always tell people I am not the Australian sci-fi actress. So if you Google Claudia Black, just pay attention. She gets a lot of play as well. So
that's true. I actually did Google you this morning because I wanted to get your your full bio and the latest bio from there, and that's exactly what I got first.
I actually wrote her a letter at one point and said, I get letters thinking that I'm her, and I'm sure she's probably some people sharing the in-depth pain of their life with her, and she's wondering, where does this come from? But hopefully she enjoys it. No, claudiablack.com is a website. And Central Recovery Press also has the library of all my books. And I have written 17 books. People say, oh my gosh, people don't know I've written 17 books. And they say, oh my gosh, how was it to write a book? And it's like, well, I've written a few others. And can I share just a quick story, whether or not you use this? But my mother recently passed away, and a week before she passed away, and she was only in hospice 2 weeks. And at this point, she's pretty much sleeping. And I come in 1 week before she passes, and she's laying in the bed, and she sits up, and she has a lot of dementia, but she looks at me as if she really knows me. And she says, oh, Claudia, what have you been doing? And so I had to quickly think about what have I been doing. And so I said, well, Mom, I just wrote a book. She said, you wrote a book? I said, yeah, I just wrote a book. It's called Undaunted Hope. And then she looks at me and she says, well, is it any good? And I just had to burst out laughing. And here my mother is dying with major dementia. And she just does that perfect motherly response. Well, is it any good? So I laughed and I said, well, Mom, I hope it's good. And then she got serious and she said, well, Claudia, is there anything I can do to help you with this? So I quickly again said, of course, Mom. I'm going to get a table. We're going to set the books on the table and you can help me stack them. How's that? And she said, great. And that was the last lucid conversation I had with my mother.
What a beautiful conversation.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, it was. She was a part of all my books over all these years, as you know. Of course, that would make sense. And but just that, was it any good, Claudia? It's very, very touching and very just touching to have a motherly experience in the moment.
Yes. And that all of our memories are, there's you're holding all the beautiful memories always in your.
Yeah. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you, Foojan, and thank you for the work that you do and sharing so much of yourself with the world.
Thank you. I know it's taken a while before we got together, but it's worth the wait. Every time I've always learned from you. I will follow you as a fan wherever you go. So just know that.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll meet again.
Absolutely. And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. Take good care, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Are you a psychotherapist looking to enhance your practice? The Awareness Integration Therapy developed by Dr. Foojan Zeine is a comprehensive guide to the principle and techniques of this powerful therapeutic approach. Join the growing community who have elevated their practice and expanded their skills by embracing Awareness Integration Therapy and witnessing its life-changing impact. Order your copy on Amazon now.